Hello and welcome to Inspired by EWB, our fortnightly podcast and video series where we talk to interesting people and share our learnings. Today we are lucky enough to be joined by Dr. Scott Daniel, Senior Lecturer in Humanitarian Engineering at UTS. Hi Scott.
Hey Hugo, thanks for the kind words of welcome. Hopefully I'll live up to it in the next 20 minutes or so.
I'm sure you will. Across your career, you've had plenty of public speaking experience through lecturing now and your previous experience on a radio series. What do you think have been your most important learnings and skills that you've used through public speaking?
Thanks. Cool question, Hugo. I think I was, pondering that and reflecting on my experiences. And I think the one thing that's sometimes hard to remember, or maybe like it escapes your mind, but that everybody watching or everyone in the audience almost always wants you to do a really good job and is on your side and will like forgive slip-ups and is there because they're interested in what you have to say. And I think like when I can try and remember that, it makes everything else a little bit easier. Sometimes I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to kind of be like pitch perfect, and when people are on side, you can just relax. And it's actually something I do with my students when we're in face-to-face sessions, at least, is just try to encourage them to be the audience that they would want to have. If you look out and you see 50 stone-faced people kind of like looking back at you very sternly, it's hard to push through that. So I ask them to be like smiling and encouraging, like it's your best friend that's presenting and you're wanting them to do a great job. And even when people aren't giving that feedback, I think often audiences are there because they're interested and they do want to hear what you have to say, and they want you to do a good job. So I think it's maybe less a technique and just more like kind of like an approach to like just be a bit more calm and collected and know that everyone's on side as they most always are.
That makes perfect sense. I've been mainly teaching in small groups, and so it's a little bit easier. Other than that technique of trying to ask the audience to understand from your point of view and engage as a friend, how else do you reckon you boost engagement in those early morning lectures when everyone's still sleepy and tired?
I think like being human about it, like being approachable, being down to earth. Like I make dorky jokes at my own expense and try to cultivate an atmosphere of kind of openness and being vulnerable. And like, I'll do that clumsily by, making fun of myself or recognizing that it's hard to, be at an 8 a.m. event or something. And I think just trying to make it more conversational rather than kind of platformed, just make it as convivial, as down to earth, as conversational as possible. And not being, and therefore like kind of not being pretentious and being kind of platformed, but just trying to be more approachable. And I think there's like it gets harder and harder and bigger groups, but there's some little things that you can do that can help convey that subtext. Like when I used to have groups of up to, I think the biggest I've done it with is a group of about 60, but I sat us all in big chairs in a circle, and they're still there primarily, like I was leading the discussion, I was the one doing most of the talking, but yet there's a subtlety imbued in the layout, which conveys that everyone is participating and everyone has a right to speak and be heard. And you don't even have to state that explicitly. It's built into just how the interaction is set up. And so I guess that's not always possible, but that would be kind of the approach that I take, is trying to make it as inclusive as possible. And you can kind of operationalize that in some ways. And little tiny things that you can do about interacting with people in those like in between moments that can help cultivate a warmer atmosphere. It's not always easy, and I've struggled online to replicate some of those like small subtle techniques. But that would be the goal that I'd have, is to that twofold, remembering that people are there because they're interested and they want you to do a good job, and trying to cultivate like a warm and kind of like level and inclusive atmosphere to the interaction.
Humor sounds like a great technique, and I can really see how that two-way communication really would boost engagement. And I also love how you mentioned that you bring everyone into a circle. Like I found that on some long training days on the weekend for volunteering events, like I've had to try that exact technique and it really helps and gets everyone more engaged. And it's amazing how the environment does that.
Like, and you know, can contrast that with, you know, someone standing up behind a podium where they're blocked behind something, and people are in tiered seating where they've, even though everyone's in the same room, that kind of spacing can kind of just set the tone, set the expectation of, oh, I'm just here and this guy's going to talk, or inclusion where everyone's got an equal voice. So I think some of those subtle ways of kind of physically expressing what you're hoping for intellectually, you know, you're hoping for an intellectual exchange of ideas, and you can cultivate that by setting the tone with some of those subtextual clues. And yeah, how to do that online, I'm still figuring out, but I love, like I used to, in the last few years, have been involved in a number of design summits, and that's what have been a really fascinating experience each time in different ways to share that with students, and lots of opportunities to have really warm and open and vulnerable conversations where you can interact with students as a human being and not pretend that you're not.
Yeah, approach really does make all that difference. To my knowledge, you're actually our first radio host or radio representative on the series. How did you actually get into radio, and what were some of the most interesting questions you were asked in your time on radio?
So I did, so years and years ago, I used to teach high schools maths and science, and stepping out of that, I got into doing science communication with Questacon, which is the science center in Canberra. And so we traveled around for a year and a bit, traveled around lots of kind of rural and remote Australia. And through that, got my first taste of radio and did like School of the Air in Kalgoorlie with some students in remote outstations, and did some ABC spots as well, promoting some of the work that we were, you know, some of the science outreach that we were doing. And then a few opportunities led to having a kind of semi-regular spot on local ABC. And I would, it was a mix of doing little science demos that, you know, that you can do with household things that you could find, you know, around the house, as well as answering questions from listeners. And one of the, I think I did it for a few years, so over that time got quite a few questions, but two stood out. One was a handwritten letter. This is only a few years ago, but it was a handwritten letter written in this beautiful scraggly script that an elderly lady had written in, wondering why, and she's kind of like wrote this, you know, full-page letter, wondering why when she saw a plane go in the sky, she could see the plane over there, but it sounded like it was coming over there, you know, because of the different you know, speeds with which light and sound waves travel. But it was kind of beautiful to see how she still was curious enough about something that she was puzzled by to try to understand it. And that kind of relates to the other question that really stood out as one that gave me a lot of pause, and one I still ponder from time to time. But it was from a teenager in Gippsland in Eastern Victoria, who wrote in a question about what makes us human. And I found that fascinating because it's one that has fascinated, you know, humanity for millennia, like for one, but also, you know, how can we approach that question? And the angle that I took was that there are in the past, there have been some hallmarks of what distinguishes humanity. You know, for example, tool use was initially, you know, postulated as being a distinguishing feature of Homo sapiens, or language. And yet we've seen that there is tool use in other animals. You know, there's a story of Jane Goodall watching chimpanzees like dip little sticks down termites' nest and pull out with a little like lollipop of termites. And you know, there's other examples from other animals. There's some form of communication, I believe, with like reading about dolphins, that they have individualized like calls for different animals, which I kind of perhaps am anthropomorphizing, but I understand is interpreted as like different names for different animals. And there's self-awareness of being able to recognize one's self in a mirror. And some other animals, like from all we can deduce, seem to be able to recognize themselves in mirrors. And so you can have all this scientific evidence to explore these different ideas about what distinguishes us. But the conclusion I came to, at least in that story, is that we wonder, that we are curious. And I guess that was the link that with the letter that I received, that curiosity about something. And that was a really fun question to think about and explore. And so it's probably my favorite from the few years. Yeah, actually, I stopped doing it a couple of years ago because I was, you're going to re-inspire me to get back into it, because I really enjoyed doing it. But as you know, I'm sure with doing your podcast, it takes a bit of preparation time and recording time and so on, and editing time. So I let it slide, but you're gonna get me going again and get out there and do it, because it's really a fun way to engage with people.
Hopefully, and it's the perfect time to do it because everyone's more engaged online.
I've listened to more podcasts and watched more TV than I care to mention the last 12 or 8 months or whatever it is. So yeah, maybe the time is right.
What makes us human literally sounds like an impossible question, because as you said, people have literally been trying to solve that for thousands and thousands of years. So
yeah, so it's and kind of like for me it's a double whammy, because wrapped up in our pursuit of kind of the intangible that question represents is to me kind of what does make us human, that we do have that curiosity. But yeah, perhaps when this gets posted online, we can get people's comments in the on the video or whatever to see what other reasons people have.
That's a great idea. So if anyone's seeing the video, feel free to post a question underneath or an idea. Also, for our non-engineering guests, would you be able to quickly explain why the sound of an airplane sounds like it's coming from somewhere else rather than...
Yeah, very good, very good. So we see, so planes travel at a sizable fraction of the speed of sound. The speed of sound in air is, I think it's about 300 meters a second. And so because light travels over the distance scales that we're dealing with on our planet, light travels effectively instantaneously because it's so quick. And so the sound will still be coming from where the plane was a few seconds ago, but the plane is traveling so fast that it's already over here before the sound reaches us. So there's actually it's exactly like the wake of a boat. If you saw a boat go by, you'd see the boat like go by over there, but then the wake from it would only reach the shore a few seconds later. And that wake is like the sound waves reaching you, but while you're still seeing the light waves coming from it, gone down river. So it's analogous to it's quite similar to the wake of a boat being behind, catching up to you later than the boat has. That was off the cuff. I hadn't prepared, so I hope that was...
It was very good, don't worry. And it also makes me kind of jealous because all the planes flying over my house are really low flying, so it means they're a lot louder.
Yes, that Sydney flight path, yeah.
Also, in the past, you've spent some time working with UNESCO.
Yeah, so sure. So that was so my PhD was in... I'll take a little back step and give a little context. So my background after working as a high school teacher was working in teacher training in Australia initially, and then abroad. I spent a couple of years in Vanuatu working with teachers there, and then a couple of years or a year and a half in Namibia. And I wanted to continue in some way in that kind of overlap of international development, the STEM background that I had, and education. And I found out about a program that UNESCO, that's supported by UNESCO, that's about, it's called Active Learning in Optics and Photonics. So it's one narrow branch of physics and engineering. But in that program, the facilitators in that program would travel to different countries around the world and try to share kind of research-based teaching approaches with local high school teachers and local lecturers. And one of the leaders of that program is Alex Mazzolini, and having found out about that, I ended up doing my PhD with him, and then with him did some work in. We spent some time in Mauritius, which is beautiful country in southern Indian Ocean, and spent some time working with teachers there, looking at trying to move beyond that you know, the traditional approaches, which are still all too common in teaching, of that, you know, sage on the stage, just kind of chalk and talk. And although it's very common, there's a lot of research evidence that it doesn't actually engage students very well in understanding the concepts. And so this program was about trying to take the best research about interactive teaching and learning techniques and sharing them with interested teachers in different countries around the world to develop their teaching skills and hopefully ultimately the learning outcomes of the students. And so that program was in Mauritius, but then since then, like it's taken. I just could have came in, or it was already quite well established, and just was involved for a short time. But it's been going for something like 10 years now, and my supervisor Alex is still, well, at least pre-COVID, was still traveling around the world delivering these programs. So it's a really impressive like accomplishment to think of how many teachers, and then you have such a strong multiplying effect when you work with teachers, because then they share what they've learned with their, you know, hundreds of students and year by year. So I think that's a really powerful way to try to have a positive impact on the world, is working with teachers.
That sounds like it would make such a profound difference, and reminds me of my year 5 assignment on Mauritius. So I have to ask, what was it like there?
Mauritius is beautiful, and it's, yes, well, there's lots of interesting things about it. I mean, first of all, the dodo is from there, and so that still features heavily in a lot of the iconography of Mauritius. It's another thing that's interesting about it is that it's actually, Mauritius is the name of the particular island. There's Île Maurice, like they speak French there, and but just how you have the Hawaiian Islands, how you have a volcanic hotspot of an upwelling of magma, and then as the crusts move over the hotspot, you get like a chain of volcanic islands that are increasingly older as the original ones move further away from the hotspot and new ones come up under where the hotspot is now. And you can see the same kind of trajectory in what's called the Mascarenes, if I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. But Mauritius, there's the island of Mauritius, there's another island called Rodrigues, and there's another island called Reunion Island. And there the same pattern of Hawaii, of the hotspot, has occurred, where I visited all 3 of the islands, and they both differ in you can see the difference in the topography, where the youngest island, Reunion, has an active volcano, active as in, you know, lava lakes and danger of explosion, and very cataclysmic geography with very dramatic calderas and like striking landscapes, and very high, because it hasn't had time to erode yet. And then as you go to Mauritius, there's kind of like eroded volcanism, and then to Rodrigues it's eroded even further. And so, like, it's interesting geologically. It's also interesting culturally, because it's got French influence. It's very similar geographically to Vanuatu in terms of being tropical in the southern hemisphere and so on. So it's interesting to see some of the parallels with how similar problems of daily life have been addressed under similar constraints, but by different cultures. So that was interesting for me in a way that I can't quite articulate very well. But there was similar, like, housing. There was, you know, traditional housing was very similar. It's also interesting, like, historically, because Matthew Flinders, you know, who traveled around Australia, also was traveling around the world. And so he was, I believe, imprisoned on the southern end of Mauritius when it was a French colony, and the Brits were at odds with the French at that time. So it's a really interesting place. And it actually shows up on Chromecast, when, you know, I have those photos that show up on Chromecast that rotate through. One of the photos is there from Mauritius. Every time it comes up, I get excited, because it's such a striking landscape that they've used some photos from there on the Google screen show. You should visit.
I really should. I never expected to be learning geography today, but I'm glad we took that tangent. It sounds truly beautiful.
It's a really special place. It's really nice.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for today, but thank you so much for joining us. You've been such an amazing guest.
Oh, this has been really fun. We didn't even get to talk about Engineers Without Borders and the work I'm doing at UTS. So maybe we can save that for another one. But Yeah, loving what you're doing with promoting Engineers Without Borders and promoting people working in the space. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Now we'll have to hand over to Ning and Muskin, who will continue the episode.
Hi guys, welcome to this week's podcast. Today we'll talk about off-grid power systems. Electricity for the most people that are listening to this podcast is easily accessible and reliable. However, access to reliable electricity is one of the most significant problems to remote and rural communities. Approximately 940 million people do not have access to the electrical grid line, and that is where off-grid power systems becomes important. I'll let Muskin continue.
So what is it? An off-grid power system is not connected to the electrical grid. The electrical grid is the network that transmits electricity produced in power stations to us. Why an off-grid power system? A successful off-grid power system is important because it is more cost-effective than connecting remote and rural locations to an electricity grid. It is also more affordable because electricity does not need to be transported and it does not rely on the consumption of fossil fuels. Power outages caused by extreme weather, such as storms, can be avoided by remote and rural communities because off-grid power systems store energy and thus can reliably provide power. The use of renewable energy sources makes it sustainable and reduces the carbon footprint because it decreases the demand to burn fossil fuels for electricity production.
Oh, that is very sustainable, I would say.
Yep. A recent example of a community switching to off-grid power systems is the Coral Lake Settlement, which is a community located in Canada and is approximately 50 kilometers away from the Arctic Circle. The community, with a population of about 160 people, decided to install a hybrid technology that combined solar energy, diesel, and a battery system to replace the use of an unreliable diesel power plant. Diesel was expensive, and the remoteness of the community created transportation issues. The power generator was also recorded to have 60 power outages in the year before replacement.
Oh, that's interesting to see that we have like proper real life usages for this stuff.
I know, right? Exactly. And to think that they can use solar energy in an area that's only 50 kilometers away from the Arctic Circle, like you would imagine how cold and dark it would be.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because a lot of stuff will function quite differently in cold temperatures.
Yeah. And like, isn't it like only, I think, 6 months of daylight? So it's really important to have
Oh,
their own.
right. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Do they have like all day long daylight in half of the year or something?
Yeah, I think it's 24 hours of daylight for 6 months.
Oh wow, that's really good for solar power.
That's the solar panels harvesting season. So the project began in 2013 by Northwest Territories Power Corporation. During the development process, they decided on a battery system with 232 kilowatts per hour of energy that was provided by SAF. The four battery modules are protected by the extremely cold climate by a container designed by SAF. It can withstand temperatures as low as -50 degrees Celsius. The 81 kilowatt solar photovoltaic system was developed by another company called Green Sun Rising. It has 546 solar panels, and 330 of these solar panels can float on permafrost.
Wow, that's impressive.
And so for the viewers who can see the screen, we can see how like the solar panels are like surrounded by snow and ice, but like the solar panels can still float on top of the permafrost. And then going back to the 24-hour daylights in the summer months, the lithium-ion batteries are charged during this time, so that the solar and diesel generators can be switched off. This has caused diesel consumption to decrease by 40% in the community.
Wow, that's really impressive.
I know, right? Like, to imagine like how they were relying solely on diesel and to go
Yeah.
from that to like solar energy.
That is really good. 40% is a lot, almost half.
Yeah. And if they keep building on this, then they could reduce it by even more,
Yeah, definitely.
reducing our demand of fossil fuels.
Mm.
While researching, I also came across this project called the Off-Grid Box. It's like this tiny compact box that's 1.8 by 1.8 by 1.8 meters, developed by an Italian company. It's supposed to generate power using solar panels and provide access to clean drinking water. However, it has an expensive cost to set up, which makes it difficult for large-scale produce and greater availability to communities.
I see. This looks more like a individual kind of project,
Yeah.
a much smaller scale than the other ones. Yeah, I think this is really good, like that people are using off-grid systems. Like the example before, like how they reduce their diesel fuel usage. I think that's gonna be really good for the environment, like in the long term.
Yeah, exactly. Reducing our overall use of fossil fuels.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really good. Plus that the remote communities, if they get access to electricity, they can be more connected to everyone else. And I think that is good as well.
Yeah, being able to use appliances that frees up time for other stuff that they can do.
Yeah, for sure. Because appliances nowadays are all run on electricity. And then if they want to use like computers and stuff to connect to people, yeah, that needs electricity as well. So it's very important.
That would also like create job opportunities if they could access electricity and then the internet.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important as well. So that's it for today. Thank you guys for joining. Before we finish, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we are based, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So thank you guys again for joining us. I hope to see you guys again next week. Bye
Thanks,
bye.
guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.